Some examples of their strange teachings are that the faithful slave protects pedophiles, or that slave will exploit you so they can live lives of luxury. Those are both bald-faced lies.
6 people have filed a civil lawsuit saying when they were children, they were sexually abused by church elders within local Jehovah's Witness Kingdom halls. Attorneys for the plaintiffs, who are now adults, say this involves a major cover-up that spans decades.
Jehovah's Witnesses have been accused of failing the victims of child sex abuse after a case in Manchester where a man who was convicted of sexual assault was allowed to cross-examine his victims. The Charity Commission, which regulates the religious group, said the questioning was inappropriate and demeaning. One victim described the meeting as worse than the court case. An audio recording of the meeting has been passed to our social affairs correspondent Michael Buchanan.
With NBC News In Depth tonight, an exclusive investigation into yet another religious organization hit with sexual abuse allegations. The Jehovah's Witnesses have settled 9 lawsuits alleging church policies protected men who abused children for many years. In settling, the church did not acknowledge wrongdoing. Now, evidence has surfaced that leaders did know about some of the men, but apparently never informed authorities.
Ebony Cavallaro now at police headquarters with details, Ebony, on the arrest of a senior religious figure facing 21 charges of rape. That's right, Melissa. The man was a senior member of the Jehovah's Witness community. He was arrested following a raid on his property. And some of these offences, well, they date back as far as 2008. Now, we understand that the alleged offences were committed against at least 4 victims. There are several charges, more than 30 in all. The 61-year-old has in total been charged with 21 counts of rape, 17 of sexual assault, 13 of procuring a sexual act by false pretences.
Australia has been given a rare insight into the workings of the Jehovah's Witness Church. One of the leaders of its secretive governing body was questioned at the Royal Commission into Child Abuse. He's defended a policy where abuse victims, most often women, must prove their claims to a panel of men.
He's a Jehovah's Witness world leader, one of 7 men who consider themselves modern-day disciples.
I'm sorry, thank you.
But today, Jeffrey Jackson was in Toowoomba Magistrates Court to face the New South Wales Royal Commission.
Has the governing body considered apologising to survivors of child sexual abuse?
I haven't been in any discussions with regard to that.
Hi, Rose here. As you heard Stephen Lett say, the accusation that the governing body protects pedophiles is an absolute, bald-faced lie. But is it? This is Barbara Anderson. She was one of Jehovah's Witnesses from 1954 to 1997. That seems like a long time ago, doesn't it? Barbara worked at Bethel at the Watchtower's headquarters in Brooklyn, New York, with her husband Joe from 1982 to 1992. Barbara was found to be a very good researcher, so she was used to help research for articles in the Awake magazine, as well as help research for the official history of the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society in the 1993 Proclaimers of God's Kingdom book, otherwise known as the Proclaimers book. Now, Barbara worked closely with Lloyd Berry and Jack Barr. They were both governing body members at the time. While researching, Barbara came across some disconcerting information. Here, I'll let Barbara tell you.
The child abuse situation was becoming so profound in my life. All I could do was think about this, and as information was coming to me, and the discussions were daily with a very small group of people in the writing department, 4 basically. Lloyd Berry over the department, he knew about the issue. He was very well acquainted. He was a very smart man, actually. Had a lot of education, worldly education behind him anyway.
Okay.
So So when I told Harry Ployan that I was leaving Bethel, I also suggested that we needed to convince the governing body that we had a really serious problem. So he and I we brainstormed on it. And so we decided, due to some information I'm not going to now discuss, it just takes too long. It's not a secret, it just takes too long.
Okay.
And we discussed that the issue at the time was regarding repressed memories. After The Awake came out, so many people came forward, men and women, and said they remembered when they were abused, they had pushed it aside. And then in years later, after this, they were triggered and they remembered what happened to them. And it was men in positions. It wasn't the rank and file Jehovah's Witnesses. It was men in positions that molested them. I have heard back in those years every kind of story you can imagine of this that this was happening. There was accusations of ritual abuse
within the organization.
Within the organization. I'm not saying that it was true, and I'm not saying it was false.
Sure,
I
but those
have
are the accusations.
And I have, yes. And so what do you do? So I was asked to do research on repressed memories. So I kind of became a pretty much an expert on it. But at the same time, the governing body was being influenced by Ted Jarris, who is a very powerful member of the governing body. Many of them called him the boss. And so he was saying that there wasn't any such thing as repressed memories. And so we're having problems. If you can't believe people, in fact, I think November of '95, Watchtower makes a statement that if you have someone come forward in one place and they remember through repressed memories, and then in another place somebody else says that, and it was the same molester, back that time, that wasn't two witnesses, that two victims about the same person, because it was due to repressed memories. So you see how that influenced believing the victims.
Right. So Ted Jarris, basically his assertion was that, like, for example, all of these letters that they received and all of that and all of these accusations, that they basically just were products of people's perhaps subconscious reaction to what they, read in the articles. It wasn't actually due to, because he basically, it sounds like he refused to believe that these things were actually happening, especially to that level of prevalence within the organization.
Absolutely.
Okay.
He was, when he learned about the Awake magazine with this article, he learned about it the same time I learned about it, and everybody else at Bethel when the Awake magazine came in his room. He was the overseer of service. He was also on the teaching committee.
Okay.
But writing department was separate, as service was separate from writing. Service didn't ask writing, even though they had governing body over them. And this writing had governed, but they didn't say, let me run this by you for your approval. They were absolutely separate. So the only time when writing would talk to another area would be when there would be a change of belief. Okay.
Right.
So then the key members of the teaching committee would be involved. Well, Jarris was on that, and but he did not know that this article was coming out, and he was against it. I was told. And so in time, April 8th, 92 was an article about thanking the governing body for this October issue. Letters were used, and it says a breath of fresh air. Well, Lloyd Berry was gone on a zone visit, and this is what happened. Ted Jarris found out that this article on the April 8th following year was coming out. He tried to stop the presses. He was dead set against it. And so, because that article was linked with the October 8th, thanking for it. So, when the report came in from the press room, whoever was overseer there, and to the writing department, and the attitude and some in the service department was that it was a fad. Child abuse was just a fad, and you can't believe this. You can't get on the bandwagon. The world is in this fad. And so there was definitely strong feelings. Also, Lloyd Berry, many years before, he was the overseer of the Japanese branch, and this was in the mid-50s, and Ted Jarris was the overseer of the Australian branch, and something happened with Ted Jarris, and he was removed from his position as overseer. The accusations against him are not out there, but it was Knorr who had Lloyd Berry come from Japan to investigate. So Lloyd knew what it was, recommended his removal. In the years, many years later, I was informed that Ted Jarris was removed for molestation.
Okay. Wow.
See, Ted went to Gilead at the end of the 40s, the early 50s, somewhere right in there. I could locate it.
Okay.
And he was waiting on his paperwork to go to Australia in the beginning of the 50s. I know that. But by around the mid-56, 55, 56, the accusations were against him.
I see.
When he went, Knorr told him to go to California. And 6 months, right away, he went and married. He told the woman he married that he was never going to marry. He told 6 months before he was never going to marry. I have that as a fact. But he married her right away. And then within 6 months, Nora put him into the special work. So they were into the circuit work. And then into the branch district work. And from there, just before 72, I have the actual dates, and he was called in to be a governing body member.
CSA isn't something new within the organization. As you heard from Barbara, it's been known since the 1950s. At the governing body level, Barbara's discoveries of Bethel and her extensive research on issues related to child sexual abuse within the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society led to her becoming an outspoken critic of the sexual abuse policies within the organization on major TV and radio programs. Her first interview was on Dateline in the early 2000s. You can YouTube it. I'll put a link in the description for you. Listen to what Barbara had to say back then.
The policies and procedures enacted by Jehovah's Witnesses protect pedophiles rather than protect the children.
Barbara Anderson, a former Jehovah's Witness, is an outspoken critic of the church on this issue.
Due to the organization's staunch two-witness policy, as well as the fact that they do not immediately turn abusers into the authorities, as it will bring reproach upon Jehovah, the organization is a haven for pedophiles. Let me ask you a question. What person is going to attack and rape? Because that's what it is. It's an attack on a child. What person will molest or rape a child in front of someone else so that there's a second witness? As you can see by this letter to the elders, dated March 14th, 1997, detailed information was taken and put into a blue envelope. There were detailed information regarding pertinent facts as to what a perpetrator of a child sexual abuse did. But the organization found that to be a liability because prosecutors were able to obtain those details for criminal pursuits. In fact, as you see from the above revision under Chapter 16, dated 11/30/21, for the Shepherd the Flock of God Elders book, the elders are no longer to put detailed information down regarding what a pedophile did. Prior to this, everything that a pedophile had done was in this file. For them to even send this letter out shows there is a problem. The governing body have even told the body of elders to destroy records, as seen here in this letter to the body of elders in Australia. Note the third paragraph. Any personal notes that were taken should be destroyed. While talking all. Millions, not thousands, but millions of your donated funds are going towards their defense and settlements in court. Stephen Lett claimed that the accusation of the governing body protecting pedophiles is a bald-faced lie. Well, as you've seen in this video, it's not. And it's not a new problem within the organization. Thousands of children, boys and girls, have been molested for decades within the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society. The fact of the matter is, it is not a lie. It is absolute truth. You see, I'm not speaking from hearsay or what I saw in the media or even what I've seen on the news. I too was a victim of child sexual abuse from an elder in a neighboring congregation. It started when I was 9 and it lasted several years. Because of the two-witness rule, nothing was done about it. It was my word against his, the word of a young girl against a prominent elder. And you have to understand, my dad was an elder, a prominent elder in our area. So if it could happen to a prominent elder's daughter, it could happen to anybody within the congregation. It does happen. I found out later in life that the elder that abused me just went from congregation to congregation molesting other girls. Again, because of the two-witness rule, nothing was done from the body of elders in my congregation. So, when he moved to a new congregation, the new body of elders were told about him. And that's how he got away with it. He never was disfellowshipped for pedophilia. He ended up being disfellowshipped for apostasy. I guess saying things negative about the organization is worse than molesting or raping a child. I remember how upset I was when the article on child sexual abuse came out in 2019. They made it sound like they encourage people to go to the authorities. But they don't. They still don't. Many that go to the authorities are disfellowshipped for divisiveness. The governing body claim that they are completely against child sexual abuse. But let me ask you something. If you were at the Kingdom Hall and somebody broke into a car out in the parking lot during the meeting, what would be the very first thing the elders do? Call the police? File a report? Then why don't they do the same thing to child sexual abusers? if you asked an elder, if somebody came to them with an accusation of child sexual abuse, what they would do, what would be the very first thing they did? What do you think? They called back east to the branch, to the legal department, to see what to do. You see, not all states require you to immediately call the authorities. So if there's a case of child sexual abuse and the state does not require it, they are not required to turn the abuser in. That's why the brothers are told to call back east, to find out what their state requirements are. If they're not required to immediately call the authorities, it's usually handled in-house with the elders. What happens when a person goes against the elders and calls the authorities in states that don't require it to be turned in? It's considered going against Jehovah, and many times they are disfellowshipped. Think I'm not telling the truth? That it's an apostate lie? Here, I'll let an elder tell you who is under oath and is being questioned about it.
In this exchange, senior counsel of the commission, Angus Stewart, refuses to let a Jehovah's Witness elder deflect blame.
What ability have we got to protect every child in Australia?
What you can do is you can report to the child protection authorities.
And that is done in some cases.
But generally it's not done, is it?
No.
See what I mean? Here's Mark O'Donnell. He's going over the most current Shepherd the Flock Elders Manual in 2020. Mr. O'Donnell is a major advocate against the current Watchtower Bible and Tract Society's policies regarding child sexual abuse. Now, these are the current policies as of this video that I'm aware of. It's almost October 2022. If your current elder and Mr. O'Donnell is not correct regarding the chapter on child sexual abuse procedures, please feel free to correct him in the comments.
You know, the average rank and file publisher, male or female, can't see the book, especially women. And the reality is, I think that, there probably are some who might pick up a copy off of their husband's shelf if he puts it on a shelf, or maybe even sees it in his briefcase or sees some open papers. It's a real culture of secrecy. And what I find interesting is that the religion is supposed to be entirely based upon the Bible and Bible principles. And everything in the Bible that the Jehovah's Witnesses use is open to the public, open to everyone, including children. And yet we have so many documents, not just this elder's manual, but we have the branch organization manual and hundreds of other manuals and letters that not even congregation elders will ever see. And so I think it's a valid point that we have a culture where even the congregation elders themselves don't have the full picture of child abuse, because they're looking through a very tightly focused lens, which is their own congregation or two congregations if they've been part of more than one. And they have very little experience with what goes on at Watchtower headquarters or with other bodies of elders. And so they're kept in the dark almost as much as rank and file publishers and the women in the congregation. It's true that the policies vary depending on what Watchtower wants the public to know. They misrepresent what actually goes on within the lives of children, and they try to present the child as having a normal family upbringing without any problems with disfellowshipping or shunning. There's no problems with being allowed to participate in sports or in music. They have a healthy environment and lifestyle. But the reality is, we all know, growing up as Jehovah's Witnesses, that children have very much a cloistered existence. So they have not altered their position in the last 9 months with regards to their child abuse policy. There was some very, very minor change that was mentioned in the S-147 And but as far as the two witness rule, the child abuse policy, they've essentially doubled down on everything and have not changed that policy. And they continue to advise elders they must contact the legal department first and not report any matters to the police unless, in very rare exceptions, the legal department determines that there is no clergy penitent confidentiality involved. And in those rare cases, they would advise an elder that they are free to report to the authorities, or even tell them to report to the authorities. But perhaps we'll get into this a little bit later. There have been a few odd cases where they have advised elders to report to the authorities, and normally that would occur after a parent has already reported to the authorities. A couple of factors happen. One, they wait until a parent actually comes forward and reports, and then they attempt to fulfill their reporting obligation after it's been reported, but not before. So that would be the primary case. The second would be when there is an example of clergy penitent exception that does not apply. And that's very rare. I mean, almost all states have mandated reporting law, and then they also have some language that needs to change, but it has language that says there is an exception for clergy or priest who receive some form of communication, and it's the practice of their religious beliefs to not share that with anyone, including the authorities. So you were asking that clergy or anyone who's a mandated reporter report allegations of abuse to the authorities, and to allow victims to have the opportunity to be interviewed by trained professionals, including law enforcement as well as professional therapists. So it is not only dangerous to the victims themselves, but it's dangerous to future victims or people that are not protected, including non-Jehovah's Witness children who are not protected because of Watchtower's policies. And the reality of the matter is they simply don't care about non-Jehovah's Witness children. In fact, their representative, Thomas Jefferson Jr., who is a branch member who testified at the Fessler trial in 2017, was questioned on the witness stand as to whether or not elders have an obligation to protect non-witness children. And he answered it very directly and said, no, there is no obligation. That's clear. It absolutely replaces the secular authorities' handling, because they, in fact, obstruct justice. And as we just discussed in the Simmental case, and this is true of many others, they obstruct the handling of child abuse investigations in multiple ways. And one of the ways is by obviously not reporting it, not cooperating with the investigation, and then ultimately, in the case of those victims who have been interviewed by the elders on multiple occasions, we might discuss this a little bit more later, but this actually is extremely damaging to victims who, according to the professionals, the victims need to be interviewed as few times as possible, both in an investigative setting and also in a therapy setting. So, I mean, it takes years and years and years for these police detectives, investigators, and therapists to understand how to interview or not interview a victim of abuse. And everything that the organization does with reference to child abuse victims is improper. It breaks all of those laws, and it makes the work of the investigators and therapists far more difficult. Forget which issue it is, but Watchtower's own magazine says about child abuse that children do not make. He had an active imagination. This wasn't a repressed memory. Children do have active imaginations, but not when it comes to child abuse. And I mentioned one final point, and that is that Watchtower's, and I forget which issue it is, but Watchtower's own magazine says about child abuse that children do not make up stories about child abuse. But Watchtower has already admitted that children don't make these stories up. So anyway, the point of this chapter is that Watchtower wants to collect all of that information, which should be handled by professional law enforcement and therapists.
In fact, even in states where it's required to report child sexual abuse, the elder body don't always turn the abusers in. They handle it in-house, within the Christian congregation, as a sin, not a crime. But unless there's a confession, abusers usually get away with it. There aren't two witnesses to the abuse happening. No two witnesses, no sin. Here is another experience of a survivor and what the elders won't do.
Lacey Jones was abused from the age of 10 for over a decade by an elder in the congregation in the West Midlands. When confronted in 2019, Clifford Whiteley confessed to other elders to some of the abuse. But Lacey has waived her anonymity to explain what happened when she told them she was going to the police.
The first thing they said was, it's your absolute right to go to the police. However, what they don't tell you is that they will not cooperate.
She asked the elders why they wouldn't hand over evidence from the confession.
What was their reasoning for not helping with the investigation?
Because Clifford told them in confidence, but also that in order to be able to talk to the police, they would need to step down from their position as elders. So I waited for at least one to say, therefore, I'll step down and whatever, I'll say we've had the confession. Nothing, silence. They didn't look at me. They were looking at the floor. They were looking at the ceiling. And I just said, but he's a paedophile. And again, without looking at me, they just said, yeah, we know.
Now, here's an attorney for a victim of the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society, and another of an attorney for the organization. Listen to the difference.
The instructions were, you keep these pedophiles secret.
The case hinges on letters from Jehovah's Witness leaders to the heads of local congregations. For almost 20 years, they've ordered them to send reports, like this one, for every known child abuser, to hide these cases from their congregations, and not to cooperate with law enforcement or the courts unless instructed to.
Religious beliefs and standards of Jehovah's Witnesses were at play in this case from start to finish. Jehovah's Witnesses abhor child abuse of any form, and the elders are counseled in that letter to give special heed to the counsel, do not reveal the confidential talk of another, quoting from the Bible book of Proverbs, chapter 25, verse 9.
Here are two elders under oath trying to explain themselves.
But within the congregation, ours is a spiritual protection. When we're talking about physical protection, that's up to the secular authorities to provide. And so
he was asked about the Watchtower's Bible-based directives to keep child abuse cases confidential.
It states in paragraph 3, there is a time to keep quiet when your words should prove to be few. Do you see that?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Joe? I object to that. It's a violation of the First Amendment, freedom of religion, freedom of association.
Do you recall becoming aware of a report of sexual abuse of a child by Jonathan Kendrick?
Yes.
When did you first become aware of such a report?
He had called us to his home to discuss or to confess to an incident with his stepdaughter.
Clark never called the police. He followed Watchtower protocol. He wrote to New York headquarters asking how to deal with Kendrick's confession. They told him not to investigate the matter further. Instead, they said, provide him with strong scriptural counsel to avoid a repetition of such a serious offense.
We don't make that public to the congregation. That's confidential.
The elders did not warn other members that one of their own was a child abuser.
And that's the policy and the practice of Jehovah's Witnesses that you learned as an elder, correct?
Yes.
Clark says the elders told Kendrick not to be alone with children, but he was still allowed to join in congregation activities that included minors. A year later, one of those minors was Candace Conti.
So, what is the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society's statement to any of this?
The organization said, When elders learn that someone in the congregation is accused of child sexual abuse, they immediately take steps to ensure the matter is reported to the external secular authorities as may be required by law, or if it appears that a child may be in danger of abuse. Elders do not shield a perpetrator from the legal consequences of his sin, do not interfere with law enforcement, and leave criminal matters to the secular authorities. Any suggestion that Jehovah's Witnesses cover up child abuse or in any way discourage or frown upon reporting allegations to the secular authorities is absolutely false.
Do your own research. You heard Barbara Anderson speak about the governing body member Theodore Jarris in this video. Research Leo Greenlees. He too was a governing body member that was quietly dismissed for pedophilia. I'll give you the clip notes. Leo Greenlees entered the Toronto, Canada Bethel in 1936, eventually becoming treasurer of the Canadian branch and of the International Bible Students Association of Canada. In 1964, he went to Brooklyn Bethel, and in 1965 was elected as a director of the Society's New York Corporation. As a director, Greenlees automatically became a governing body member when that body was formed and instituted in 1971, because if you were a board member, you were a governing body member then. In late 1984, Greenlees was allegedly convicted by the rest of the governing body of molesting a 10-year-old boy. See, the boy's parents apparently complained to the society and the branch took action. So Leo K. Greenlees was forced to resign and leave Bethel in late 1984. But after leaving Bethel, Greenlees served as a special pioneer and eventually an elder in the downtown congregation in New Orleans, Louisiana. So much for protecting the flock. He died in the late 1980s. Now, what's really interesting is that the boy who Greenlees molested applied for Bethel service a few years later, around 1991, but was rejected by the governing body. Apparently, they feared that other Bethelites would tell the young brother the rumors about Greenlees, not realizing that he was actually Greenlees' victim, causing the young brother to know that justice really hadn't been done. He might have even confirmed the rumors. And this is how people are feeling about the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society's child sexual abuse procedures and what they feel needs to be done about it.
How difficult is it to litigate the Jehovah's Witnesses?
They're extremely difficult to litigate against.
Kathleen Hallisey is a London-based lawyer who won the first ever judgment against the Jehovah's Witnesses in the UK for historic sexual abuse. Her office has become the go-to law firm for challenging the Jehovah's Witnesses.
Do you believe that the Jehovah's Witnesses have a policy that purposefully protects pedophiles and puts children at risk?
I do. I would describe it as a scandal and a global cover-up and a protection of abusers.
At the risk of children?
Absolutely. If you have a policy that requires there to be a second witness to child abuse, it means that virtually every allegation of child abuse is going to go no further. And that puts the child at risk, it puts other children at risk, and it protects the person who's the abuser.
Child sexual abuse is not just a sin, it's a crime. One that should put the perpetrator in jail where he or she belongs to protect other children. Then that person should be stigmatized as a child sexual predator for the rest of their life. From my own experience, yes, the governing body do protect pedophiles, Stephen Lett. So, when you hear a governing body member or helper say the following,
like Daniel, we encounter some who oppose and misrepresent us. How can we prevent our faith from being undermined? Please pay close attention to Brother David Splain of the governing body as he delivers the talk, put up a hard fight for the faith.
He has something else in mind, a different type of attack, and this is a sneaky one. So suppose a report indicates that someone has been charged with a crime or that he's being investigated. All right, you have two words, charged and investigated. It doesn't mean he's guilty. Someone's charged with a crime, and the case is widely publicized in the media, and the media present the case in such a way that everyone who hears about it thinks the man is guilty. Of course, to avoid a lawsuit for slander or libel, these media reports are very carefully worded to consider the source of the words. If they are the words of apostates, why would we believe them? It is talking about false brothers who are presenting a real danger to the congregations, in some ways a greater danger than outright persecution. And did you notice what Jude said about those false brothers? They had slipped in. They were sneaky. Well, that was true back then, and it's true today, as we'll see. And brothers, this is a very serious matter that we're considering today. Think of this. Was the Christian congregation brought down by persecution? And it wasn't. It was brought down by false brothers, apostate teachings. And so the devil can use an outright attack. He can use persecution to try to batter the structure of the Christian congregation, but sometimes he uses rot from within, a subtle means to attack us. But whatever method he uses, we have to fight. If we're stabilized in the faith, we won't be quickly shaken by unfounded accusations by apostates or the media. This is war. We need to put up a hard fight for the faith, as if our life depended on it, because it does.
Look deeper. It turns out it's not apostate lies, but truth. When David Splain stated to check the facts, to be like the Bereans, it goes both ways. You have to be able to check the organization's facts as well. Does the organization's truths bear out actual facts, or are there little truths sprinkled in to make their lies palatable seem true? Watch the following clip and think it through. Does this even sound right? Because David Splain is saying that this is an actual experience.
I'll tell you an actual experience. Some time ago, a lawyer told me about a case he had. That was a case of medical malpractice by a doctor. There was a jury, and at trial, the doctor was clearly shown to be in the wrong, but the jury didn't give the patient a penny. The lawyer was confused, so after the trial, he approached two of the jurors and asked, "If you don't mind, tell me which part of the testimony you didn't believe." The jurors replied, "Oh, we didn't get that far. The doctor was cute, and we didn't want him to have to pay anything."
Do you really think that that was a real experience? That a jury would actually do something like that? The organization's covering up of child sexual abuse, as you've seen, isn't something new. Child sexual abuse has been going on within the organization for decades, as you heard with Barbara Anderson, as far back as the 1950s. The organization even lied to protect pedophiles. Garrett Loesch stated that he does not direct the day-to-day operations of Watchtower and does not answer to Watchtower. How can that be if he is a governing body member? It even cost the society money because he refused to testify. Now, some have gone to desperate measures. This is what I mean.
Court documents obtained by W5 show that Jehovah's Witnesses elders are instructed to keep a record of every single child sexual abuse allegation and then forward those allegations onto the organization's own legal department. Now, in many countries, including here in Canada, the law requires that allegations like that be dealt with by police. And yet there's ample evidence that calling the police has not been the regular practice of the Jehovah's Witnesses.
Howdy, folks.
He's doing this.
Just another day in the office.
Zeb strolls in and interrupts Jehovah's Witnesses' services.
We have a special announcement. It's concerning the two-witness rule.
Telling the congregation their religious sect has some dark secrets.
We're going to ask you to leave, sir.
And this hasn't happened just once.
Our Heavenly Father, we don't have to listen to these men anymore.
Let's go.
And all that happens is we wind up sweeping these cases under the wrong.
Okay, let's go. That's actually trespassing.
No, it's
by
not.
doing that.
You're right, it's a public meeting. They usually call the police, and then they usually grab me, manhandle me, and throw me out.
Hold on. Hey.
Why won't you call the police on pedophiles?
Hey.
It's the only way I personally know that I can really make a difference. I don't like doing it. It doesn't feel right. And some places it might be illegal, but I don't know another way to teach that many people at one point in time.
You come in here to disrupt us.
I am. I'm trying to tear down the tower.
A dozen of his fellow protesters will join him. They've sneaked in and spread out among the congregation. And as soon as the opening hymn ends, they start the interruptions, camera phones rolling.
If I could just have your attention for a moment, guys. I want you to ask your elders about the two-witness rule, because the authorities are not called when children are abused.
The Watchtower Bible and Tract Society of New York is being investigated. I'm talking here, sir, I'm sorry.
We're asking you very nicely at this time to leave.
So please Google all you can, folks. Learn all you can so that you can maybe escape this cult. The Watchtower Bible and Tract Society of New York is being investigated. I'm talking here, sir, I'm sorry.
A dozen former Jehovah's Witnesses have infiltrated this Kingdom Hall. It's a few miles from the religious sect's world headquarters in New York State. Among them, Canadian Tricia Frangina from Edmonton.
My father sexually abused me for the first 14 years of
They say Jehovah's Witnesses policies fail to protect child sex abuse victims, shield pedophiles, and shun people who speak out. And they want this congregation to hear what they have to say.
I was raped and was told you shouldn't have done that, and I was disfellowshipped for it. 18 years old and not allowed to have my mother talk to me for a year.
One after another, the protesters stand up to make disturbing allegations. Allegations that many of these congregants have likely never heard before.
My ex-husband is a pedophile. He raped 2 children in the Kingdom Hall. He is still allowed to be talked to by everybody.
This is an organization that's supposed to love and protect children.
Your invitation to be here has been revoked.
Don't shun your children. jwfacts.com.
After several minutes, everyone is finally ejected, and the chaos spills outside. But the accusations continue.
Can I ask you, how many pedophiles have you encountered in your record as an elder? I'm sorry, there's no comment.
Yeah, you treat us like we're dead.
I will not hate you guys. I will not hate you. You look at me like I don't exist. I'm telling you, as a man, I'm right here. So I have no more time in my life for you guys. I'm done with this whole thing, man. Done.
A single police officer shows up, and the group slowly leaves. They reassemble in a parking lot across the street, happy they forced a different point of view into fresh ears. Tricia Frangina, who says she survived years of sexual abuse as a child, thinks the protesters' plan wasn't perfect, but it's still worth celebrating.
You could tell that people were just like, oh God, like plugging their ears. But there were a couple in the front that seemed really affected by it. So you never know who's gonna go home and try and find the truth.
Do you blame them? They've had something awful happen to them and were told to keep silent. If you were molested or you knew of a molester and you knew that nothing was done because of the two-witness rule or because it will bring reproach upon Jehovah, would you be upset? Would you want people to know what happened? That's why some people do what they do. They're desperate. Child sexual abuse within the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society is not new, but it's still happening. It's still being covered up and denied that it even takes place within the organization. It's not a bold-faced lie. Please see a link that I'll put in the description for a Vice documentary that came out in July of 2021. This documentary gives you first-hand account of adults who experienced sexual assaults as children in the organization. This is Erwin Zulkin. He's an attorney who is representing victims of child sexual abuse that has been covered up by the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society. He's actually going after the governing body for the lack of safety they provide children when it comes to the organization's child sexual abuse procedures. Please contact him if you've been a victim. My abuser's dead now. Probably never get the closure or apology that I'd like. But if you're a victim now, hopefully Mr. Zulkin can help you get what I never will. Please, child sexual abuse is happening within the organization. It is being covered up. It is costing the organization millions and millions of dollars. Your dollars that you thought was going to the worldwide work. This is not an apostate lie. It is truth. My truth.
And I don't think it ever left. I know it never left me. You know, it's always there. And it was just probably one of those days that, you know, I just felt it.
I think after I had found that out, I had this sense of guilt. You know, what if I did something? What if I hadn't been such a coward? What if I had done something to maybe protect this other child, you know? I knew what he was capable of, but I didn't do anything, you know? And then now look what happened.